The crisis at 30,000 feet. The afternoon sunlight poured through the windows of Flight 447 as passengers settled in for the cross-country journey from Chicago to Los Angeles. In first class, Marcus Thornton adjusted his designer suit and impatiently signaled for a flight attendant, his expression reflecting the entitled irritation of someone used to immediate service. At 42, Marcus was the CEO of Thornton Financial Group, a position that had inflated his ego to match his bank account. He treated service workers with barely concealed contempt, viewing them as inferior beings whose sole purpose was to cater to his comfort. Several rows behind him in economy, Daniel Cooper sat with his 7-year-old daughter Emma, who clutched a worn stuffed rabbit and nervously looked out the window. At 36, Daniel had the weathered appearance of someone who had seen more of life than most people twice his age. His casual denim jacket and modest clothing suggested he was far from wealthy. "Daddy, is flying scary?" Emma asked, squeezing his hand as the engines began their pre-flight rumble. "Not at all, sweetheart," Daniel assured her gently. "Flying is actually one of the safest ways to travel. The pilots are highly trained, and these planes are incredible machines." As they taxied toward the runway, Marcus noticed Daniel helping Emma buckle her seatbelt and felt a surge of disdain. He leaned toward the flight attendant Jennifer, a professional woman, and spoke loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Is there any way to upgrade away from the budget travelers?" Marcus said, gesturing dismissively toward Daniel and Emma. "I paid for first class to avoid sitting near crying children and people who clearly can't afford better accommodations." Jennifer maintained her professional composure despite the rudeness. "Sir, you're already in first class, several rows ahead of that family. I don't believe they'll disturb you." Daniel overheard the comment, but chose to ignore it, focusing instead on making Emma comfortable. He had learned during his years in the military that some people's opinions simply weren't worth engaging with, and his daughter's well-being was infinitely more important than responding to a stranger's arrogance. The flight proceeded normally for the first hour. Emma had fallen asleep against Daniel's shoulder, and most passengers were reading, working on laptops, or watching the in-flight entertainment. Marcus was on his third glass of expensive scotch, loudly conducting business calls despite requests from nearby passengers to lower his voice. Then everything changed in an instant. A sharp, mechanical sound echoed through the cabin, followed by violent shaking that sent overhead compartments flying open and oxygen masks dropping from the ceiling. The plane lurched sideways, throwing passengers against their seatbelts as screams filled the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Stevens." A strained voice came over the intercom. "We're experiencing a serious mechanical failure. Please remain calm and secure your oxygen masks." Emma woke up crying in terror, and Daniel immediately helped her with her oxygen mask while securing his own. Around them, panic was spreading as passengers realized the severity of their situation. In the cockpit, Captain Stevens and First Officer Martinez were fighting desperately to control the aircraft. A critical hydraulic failure had compromised their ability to steer, and Captain Stevens had just realized something that made his blood run cold. "Martinez, I need you to take over here," Stevens said, his voice tight with pain. "I think I'm having a heart attack." The younger pilot's face went white as he watched his captain clutch his chest. "Sir, I can't land this plane alone with failed hydraulics. I don't have the experience." Stevens grabbed the intercom with shaking hands, knowing he had only moments before he lost consciousness. "This is the captain. We have an emergency situation. I need to know immediately if there are any licensed pilots on board, preferably with experience in emergency procedures. Please identify yourself to the flight attendants immediately." The cabin erupted in fresh panic as passengers realized both the severity of their situation and the fact that their captain was incapacitated. Marcus, his face pale with terror, began shouting about his importance and demanding special consideration for emergency evacuation. Jennifer moved through the cabin with remarkable calm, asking passengers if anyone had piloting experience. When she reached Daniel's row, Emma was crying into her father's shoulder while he tried to soothe her fear. "Sir, do you have any flight experience?" Jennifer asked, though she wasn't hopeful given his economy seat placement. Daniel hesitated for only a moment before responding. "I'm a former fighter pilot, 10 years with the Navy, specialized in emergency situations and difficult landings. I flew F-18s in combat zones." Jennifer's relief was palpable. "Please come with me immediately, sir. Your daughter can come too." As Daniel stood up with Emma in his arms, Marcus overheard the conversation and laughed bitterly. "You're trusting our lives to some economy passenger who claims he flew planes? This is insane. I demand we find someone qualified." Daniel paused and looked directly at Marcus for the first time. "Sir, I understand you're scared. We all are. But right now, I'm the only person on this plane with the training to help land this aircraft. You can either let me try to save all our lives, or you can keep complaining about seating arrangements." The quiet authority in Daniel's voice silenced even Marcus's entitled protests. Jennifer led Daniel toward the cockpit, while Emma stayed with another flight attendant who promised to take care of her. In the cockpit, the situation was dire. Captain Stevens had lost consciousness, and First Officer Martinez was struggling to maintain altitude with severely limited control surfaces. "I'm Daniel Cooper, former Navy fighter pilot," Daniel announced as he entered the cockpit. "What's our status?" Martinez quickly briefed him on the mechanical failures and the captain's condition. "We've lost most hydraulic systems. I can barely keep us level, and I've never landed a commercial aircraft under these conditions." Daniel assessed the instrument panel with the rapid precision of someone whose training had been forged in life-or-death situations. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. You maintain our current heading while I work out an approach path. We're going to use asymmetric thrust and what little hydraulic control we have left to guide this plane down." "Can you really land this?" Martinez asked, his voice carrying desperate hope. "I've landed damaged fighters on carrier decks in storm conditions," Daniel said calmly. "This is bigger and slower, but the principles are similar. We're going to make it." For the next 20 minutes, Daniel worked with Martinez to prepare for an emergency landing at the nearest airport. He communicated with air traffic control, calculated approach angles, and coached the younger pilot through procedures that would compensate for their damaged systems. In the cabin, passengers listened to updates over the intercom as Daniel explained in clear, calm language what was happening and what they needed to do to prepare for landing. His confident voice began to ease the panic, replacing it with focused preparation. Even Marcus found himself listening with reluctant respect as this economy passenger demonstrated expertise that made it clear he was anything but ordinary. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Daniel Cooper speaking from the cockpit," came the announcement. "In about 10 minutes, we're going to execute an emergency landing. It's going to be rough, but First Officer Martinez and I are confident we can bring this aircraft down safely. Follow your flight attendant's instructions exactly. Maintain brace position when instructed, and trust that we're doing everything possible to get everyone home safely." Emma, listening from her seat with the flight attendant, whispered, "That's my daddy. He's going to save everyone." The approach was harrowing. Daniel coached Martinez through a descent that required constant adjustments as they compensated for their limited control. Emergency vehicles lined the runway as the damaged aircraft made its final approach at a steeper angle than normal, traveling faster than ideal, but still within survivable parameters. "Steady. Steady!" Daniel coached as the runway approached. "Keep that right wing up. Good. Prepare for ground effect. Stay with me." The landing was hard, much harder than normal, and the plane bounced once before settling onto the runway with screeching tires. Daniel immediately helped Martinez deploy the emergency brakes and reverse thrust, fighting to keep the aircraft straight as it decelerated. When the plane finally rolled to a stop, surrounded by emergency vehicles, the cabin erupted in cheers, tears, and prayers of gratitude. Daniel helped Martinez shut down the systems before, rushing back to the cabin to find Emma, father and daughter, reunited in a tearful embrace while passengers around them applauded. Jennifer made an announcement. explaining that the economy passenger, who many had ignored, was actually a decorated military pilot who had just saved all their lives. Marcus Thornton, humbled for perhaps the first time in his adult life, approached Daniel as passengers were preparing to evacuate. "Mr. Cooper," Marcus said quietly, "I owe you an apology that goes far beyond my rudeness on this flight. I've spent years judging people by their wealth and appearance, and today you've shown me how meaningless those measurements are when it really matters." Daniel looked at him with understanding rather than judgment. "Mr. Thornton, fear makes people say things they don't mean. What matters is what we learn from experiences like this. What you did today," Marcus continued, his voice breaking slightly. "You saved my life and everyone else's. You're a hero. And I was treating you like you were beneath me because of where you were sitting." Emma, still in her father's arms, spoke up with the clarity that children sometimes possess. "My daddy says that what's inside people is more important than what's outside. Maybe you just forgot that for a while." In the weeks following the emergency, Daniel's story made national news. His heroism earned him recognition from aviation authorities and the military, but more importantly, it sparked a broader conversation about how society values different types of work and worth. Marcus Thornton underwent his own transformation. The near-death experience had shaken loose his certainties about what made people valuable. He established a foundation supporting veterans' transitions to civilian life and became an advocate for treating service workers with dignity and respect. Daniel returned to his quiet life, uncomfortable with the attention, but grateful for the opportunities it created to advocate for other veterans struggling to find their place after military service. He used his moment of fame to highlight the skills and dedication that veterans brought to civilian life. Regardless of their current economic circumstances, the flight attendant Jennifer later said in interviews that the most striking thing about Daniel wasn't his technical skill or his bravery, but his humility. He saved over 200 lives, and all he wanted to know was if his daughter was okay. That tells you everything about what really matters. The emergency at 30,000 feet had revealed a truth that society often forgets: that worth isn't determined by wealth, status, or seating assignments, but by character, competence, and the choices we make when circumstances demand our best.